Hello, friends. I'm Jonathan Pishner with Apex Counseling, and today I wanted to talk about something that's kind of complicated. I'm going to simplify it as much as possible. But we work with people a lot on self-esteem and being able to appreciate themselves and not beat themselves up and basically think that they're awful. And a lot of people struggle with self-esteem right now. And so I wanted to point out one thing that really causes this and suggest some ways that people can work on helping themselves with this. So uh, let's talk about kind of the unspoken standard that causes self-esteem issues below the surface. I don't think it's going to be a surprise when I say that our unspoken standard that we often have for ourselves is perfection. That's not going to be a surprise. But I want to make a case for why that is and why people struggle with it and why so many people struggle with it even when they think they don't. Because there's a lot of times where if I was to say to someone, do you think you're comparing yourself against an image that's too perfect? That you're thinking you should be, you know, too perfect of a person in every area, and that's why you don't like yourself. Most people would say, no, of course not. I know perfection's unattainable. And that's the correct answer. If I was giving a quiz, of course you would give that because that's the right answer. But subconsciously, a lot of us still hold that image. And here's why. There's a thing that we have available now that used to not be available. We have too many points of comparison in almost every area now. Let's pretend for a moment that somebody has poor self-esteem because their body image, they don't like the way their body looks. Well, if I go to Google and just type in fit body, what am I going to see? I think most people can guess what I'm going to see. I'm going to see a body that is pretty muscular and has not only a low percentage body fat, but probably an unsustainably low percentage of body fat. And I'm not going to get one picture and 5 pictures. I'm going to get dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds of them. And they're all going to look really similar. And they're all going to be body types that are probably some level of unsustainable for most people. That's the same thing if I went to YouTube and typed in like examples of great speeches. Well, we have so many points of comparison now that you can get hundreds and hundreds of examples of really, really well done public speeches. And for the person who has bad self-esteem because they have social anxiety and they think that that's terrible that they can't speak well and easily in front of others, there's so many points of comparison, hundreds upon hundreds, that it accidentally acts in the subconscious to create this image that's not perfection. That's not people who nailed it one time and happened to take a video of it, but that's just what standard is. That's what average is. When you Google the fit body thing, there's so many data points that the subconscious thing that we take on is that's not a bunch of people who happen to take a picture at like their peak physical fitness that they couldn't sustain. Subconsciously, we take that on as that's what's average. And this is every area. There are so many examples of people who got perfect scores on the SAT, and so many examples of people who got straight A's. And what happens is, because we have all these areas where we wish to perform, they aggregate in our head. And so we end up with this idea when we look at ourselves that we should be able to have a body with 2% body fat and should be able to score 1,600 on the SAT and make a room full of people be deeply engaged with our words and think we did a great speech and just all of this stuff. And this is all subconscious. Whenever I ask you, hey, do you really think you can do this? You would answer no. And yet, anytime we start working on self-esteem deeply, it always comes out some version of perfection that a person is comparing themselves with. It just takes a lot of digging. So the thing that I'm going to invite people to do to help themselves. And one other point. Part of this is also because you can't just Google well-rounded person and get an image of what that looks like. Like you can't, there's no way to do that because that's so broad. You can't make that easily digestible. So our subconscious doesn't digest that very easily. It digests all these much more narrow data points and crafts this image of perfection. So here's the thing that I would invite people to try, because this has been very powerful for a number of clients and could be very powerful for people watching this video. Let's assume that you struggle with self-esteem. You really do not think well of yourself. A good assumption to make is that you are comparing yourself to some unreasonable standard of perfection. Even if you think maybe you're not, it's still a good assumption to assume you could be. And knowing how you accidentally crafted that standard of perfection is very useful. Anyone who's watched my videos with any regularity knows that at some point I complain about social media in a fair number of them, and today is no exception. Social media helps us craft that image of perfection because we don't often take pictures or post stuff about the stuff that's wrong. We have a tendency to post our highlight reel, as most people know. And so we consume highlight reel after highlight reel, and slowly and subtly and over the course of time, we craft this image of what our lives should look like, and it's some version of perfection. So that step one is assume that you're probably comparing yourself against that, and know how you crafted it. Social media is definitely part of it, but also you probably crafted it. Body image is easy to craft anywhere, although happily we are shifting away from it. But as early as 3-4 years ago, you only saw the most ripped, shredded up dudes on the front of men's fitness magazines. You only saw the skinniest, unsustainably thin women on the front of women's magazines. There was a very clear image of what average should be, but instead it was an unsustainable thing. So knowing how you've crafted it is powerful, and also trying to figure out, and this is the harder part. This is the part that you may end up needing a lot of help with. Figuring out what is actually average, because a lot of people that struggle with self-esteem are actually above average in a lot of areas, but they think they're not because of so many data points of comparison. They think they suck and they're in the bottom 10%, even though they're not, because everything we look at when we compare ourselves is perfection. So if you have some means by which you can see what's average, that helps a lot. If I was going to make up a way to do that with public speaking, I would send people to networking events and public speaking classes, not for the purpose of participating, but for the purpose of watching and seeing what average looked like. Because that'd be probably a pretty good way to see what the average person is like. And that's a much more reasonable comparison. When you are trying to figure out what's average for body type, I mean, just walking down the street, you can see what's average. And yet we only compare ourselves to the most I don't even want to call it fitness, the most absurd examples of body shaping. I think I'll call it that, because I can't call fit unsustainably thin bodies fit. That doesn't taste right to me. So anyway, I mostly wanted to put this out because a lot of people struggle with self-esteem because they don't think they're being perfectionistic, and yet they are, because that's what we're fed all day and every day, just from every corner of the internet and everything we see, and it's not even necessarily malicious in a lot of ways. It's just when we go to look for something, we are accidentally able to come across too many examples of people at the top fractional 1% stuff, and that subconsciously starts to craft us an image of perfection that is unsustainable, and it accidentally sends us the message that we are supposed to be that perfect in every area. So hopefully this is useful to somebody out there. As always, if you struggle with this and you're not able to get good benefit through self-help materials like what we put out, get with a skilled counselor. This is really important. You have to be able to think well of yourself to live your best life. So if you can't do it through self-help materials, get with somebody skilled, get some assistance. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for a few minutes today. I'm Jonathan Pishner with Apex Counseling, and I will see you next time.